Lights here.
Well, good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our Festival of Learning and Teaching this year. My name is Peter Haynes, and I'm the Vice Provost for Education and Student Experience here at Imperial. It's my pleasure to be able to welcome you, but also to start with the safety announcements. So just to be aware, as ever, we're not aware of any planned fire drills over the next 3 days, as far as I'm aware. So if the alarm goes off, then please do exit either through the door that you came in at the back, or otherwise through the doors to your right-hand side there, and find your way to the assembly point. So as I said, it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. This festival is a fantastic opportunity for us to celebrate our recent achievements and innovations, and as well as that, to look forward to the challenges and opportunities that are ahead of us. And what's particularly special about these 3 days is it spans the whole college, giving us a rare chance actually to spread great ideas and to identify new opportunities for collaboration as well. Now, it certainly seems as though higher education is at quite a significant point at the moment. After many years, decades, possibly arguably even centuries of relatively little change. We've recognised the importance of the wider student experience alongside the delivery of our educational programmes in the classroom. And of course, the mental health and well-being of our students very much at the forefront of our minds. We've come through the COVID pandemic with new insights into the power of digitally enhanced delivery of learning and teaching. And we're on the brink, it feels, of new developments arising from artificial intelligence, tools with the potential to transform how many jobs are done. And therefore, our role as a university in preparing people for that needs us to rethink the skills that our graduates will need to succeed in their careers, not just the careers that we know that they might start out in when they leave us in a few years' time, but actually the careers we have not yet imagined that we might go on to in 10 or 20 years beyond that. And alongside thinking about the skills that they need, also thinking about the opportunities, the potential benefits of us being able to deploy those sorts of technologies within our own programs as well. Now, our learning and teaching strategy is 5 years old. It's enabled us to achieve a great deal already. So we've reviewed our curricula. We've developed new approaches to teaching, we've transformed learning spaces, we've spread a culture of student partnership, we've supported digital innovation, and we've expanded multidisciplinary opportunities through things like iExplore. The establishment of the Centre for Higher Education Research and Scholarship has encouraged innovation and has ensured that our initiatives are based on evidence and can be properly evaluated as well. Now, earlier this year, we made our submission to the Office for Students for the latest round of the Teaching Excellence Framework. And the learning and teaching strategy featured quite heavily in evidencing institution-wide innovation in support of education and the student experience. So I'm delighted that the college has committed to continue funding for the strategy. And that means that we'll be able to continue with community-driven programs like the Digital Innovation Fund and the Student Shapers programme as well. And I think going forward, increasingly, there is going to be an expectation from the outside world that we as an institution are more joined up in our approach to the delivery of education. And that, again, is a reason why this festival is so important. Now, as you know, last summer we began a review of the strategy to inform a refresh for the next 5 years. We consulted with staff and students and identified 3 priority themes. The first was assessment and feedback, taking fresh approaches and ensuring that the associated workload on our students and staff is balanced and appropriate. Secondly, discovery-based learning, equipping our students with problem-solving skills that can be deployed in real life. And thirdly, lifelong learning, supporting our alumni throughout their careers, not just at the start, strengthening our links with industry and attracting and supporting prospective students. So I'm delighted that the first 2 of those themes, assessment and feedback, discovery-based learning, form the focuses of the first 2 days of this festival. That's fantastic. And I think it's probably a fair bet that lifelong learning may well feature in a future edition of this as well. Now, those three themes are supported by two enablers. Firstly, growing our digital education capabilities. Now, I think importantly, that's not just about creating facilities. It's not about hardware, kits, that sort of thing. I think most importantly, that's about the expertise, both in the people who can design these innovative digital resources and then also deliver them as well. So our EdTech and Digital Media Lab teams are crucial there. The second enabler is providing a supportive environment to foster a sense of community. And that brings us to the topic of the final day of this festival and relates to a proposed academic strategy project on the Imperial experience, which seeks to articulate and promote a holistic approach to the student experience and the student journey through Imperial from sort of first contact all the way through beyond graduation, when actually, hopefully, we will see our alumni re-engaging with us again and again through things like lifelong learning. So this festival promises to be an exciting and informative 3 days. I want to thank all those who've been involved in putting the programme together, Sherry, Richard, Tiffany. I'm sure there may be others. Congratulate each and every one of you who is contributing in some way to this festival. As you know, we're the Guardian University of the Year for 2023. We're also the University of the Year for Graduate Employment, according to the Times Good University Guide. Now, those awards testify to two things, I think: the talent of our student body, but also the dedication and commitment of our staff. So congratulations to you on that achievement, and enjoy the festival. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Peter, for the warm welcome. So I have the great pleasure of inviting our first speaker for the three-day event. So our keynote speaker this morning is Professor Oguz Acar from King's College London. He's Professor of Marketing and Innovation and has done lots of interesting work around creativity, innovation, and particularly for today's theme, on how using discovery-based approaches can help to foster creativity and innovativeness in our students. I think he's going to talk a bit about also lots of different terms. So if you Google anything around this topic, you'll see terms such as discovery-based learning, inquiry-based learning, even active learning as a kind of umbrella term there. So lots of different terms used sometimes interchangeably, which isn't always very helpful when you're trying to devise your teaching approaches. So his research has been published in many top journals and also featured in lots of media, popular media outlets. In the creativity space, this is really where I think Professor Acar comes into his own, and is one of the main reasons why we invited him today, because for students to learn in a discovery-based way, they have to really be able to go on a bit of a, excuse the term, but a journey, which has at its heart, I think, letting go, taking risks, being creative, and so on, which is really at the heart of lots of the work that Professor Acar does. In the talk today, there are two ways of interacting. So there will be some time at the end for questions, but if, as the talk is going ahead, if something comes into your mind, then feel free to use Mentimeter. So as on the slide here, so just go to menti.com and put the code in. On the board as well, the code is there for the whole talk. So pop questions in there, and I'll then either put them to Oz at the end, or feel free to also do the traditional thing and pose your question verbally at the end too. So I will not take any more of your time. Professor Oz.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? Go right back as well. Thank you, Richard. And thanks everyone for coming. I am extremely excited to be here. Thank you very much. Right. Thanks for the lovely introduction as well. So let's start with a really full disclosure. I am not an expert on discovery-based learning. Just if you're expecting that, please lower your expectations. I'm sure there are people here who knows much more about that than me. But I'm a practitioner of it as a teacher. I implement it in my own teaching. And I know a thing or two about innovation as well. So I've been researching innovation from a behavioral standpoint for the last 15 years or so. I call my research areas behavioral innovation, which is a term that I made up inspired by behavioral economics. So it's basically what it means is I try to understand creation, evaluation, and adoption of innovation from a behavioral perspective. So building on social sciences to try to make these connections. So, but innovation is a bit of a right. So if you just do a Google search, you're going to see billions of results. I did actually around 2 billion. And if you go to Amazon, you're going to be finding tens of thousands of books on that. So I think it's useful to first define what I mean by innovation, so we are on the same page. And in general, scholars tend to agree on two components of innovation or innovativeness. And the first component has to do with generation of novel and useful ideas, so the creativity component. But beyond that, it's also has a component of implementing that creativity, or putting that creativity into it. So when I say innovation, that's what I'm thinking about: generation of useful and novel ideas and implementing that. And so based on my 15 years of research on innovation, I'm going to share an eye-opener with you. Innovation matters. I know it's not quite eye-opener, but I'm just going to tell you a bit about why I am interested in innovation and why I think it matters for our students. And I'm going to start with some obvious statistics or some obvious insights. So one of them is innovation matters at country level. And you can see that from the grants that are being invested by countries, the strategic agendas of all these different countries, European Union, US, UK as well. You can see that a lot of countries are trying to create an environment, like, for example, creating regional ecosystems and so on, or investing in really millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to promote innovation. So innovation matters at country level. Innovation also matters at organizational level. So this is a statistic from a survey that Boston Consulting Group did in 2021. And that results are based on responses of 1,600 executives across the world. So what they asked in there is, what are the top priorities for you? And 75% of the participants considered that innovation is top 3 priority. And compared to 2020, it's actually increased significantly as well. So there's actually and they usually think that it's also going to increase in importance. And the reason why I'm sharing 2021 results, but not 2022, is because I'm lazy. No, they didn't ask the same question, so it wasn't really comparable. So I actually double checked that. So organizations consider it important. And perhaps unsurprisingly, they want a workforce that can innovate, so they can be more innovative, right? And this is a result. It's very crowded, I know. Don't try to read all of it. So this is the result from World Economic Forum Future of Jobs. And what they try to do, among other things, is to identify what are the key skills for the workforce. And we see these skills that relate to innovativeness, such as creative thinking, adaptability, flexibility, agility, really scores high up there. And the second most important, according to the kind of executives that participated in this survey. And this is also a survey that's done with executives, around, I think, 803. I am remembering right, executives, and that's based on their responses. So they think skills that relate to innovativeness is important. And they also think, and this is another kind of super complex and crowded statistics, and they also think that they're going to increase in importance. So the one, this blue one is the percent of organizations or executives that think that innovation or that particular skill will increase in importance, and the purple one is the proportion of respondents who think that will decrease in importance in the next 5 years. So you can see that creative thinking is all the way up there in terms of the extent to which participants think that they will increase in importance. Okay, enough about innovation. And the reason why I introduced this is kind of twofold. And one is to kind of explain you the perspective that I'm coming from in approaching discovery-based learning. And the second thing is giving more data about this kind of obvious insight that innovativeness of students matter. And obviously, it's not one of the key or only objective of education, but one of our objectives is to, as you also kind of noted, to prepare our students for their next step, to help them gain the employability skills that will help them in the next step. So I guess it's based on this, it's probably not far-fetched to say that developing innovativeness of our students is important. So I've been thinking about that also in my practice, and that led me to kind of get to know and familiarize myself with the world of educational sciences, in particular discovery-based learning. So I tried to think how could we use discovery-based learning to increase innovativeness of the students. But before that, one thing that I noticed is people define it quite differently in the literature, and people consider so many different activities as part of discovery-based learning, which I don't always necessarily agree. So let me give first a definition again, so that we are on the same page. So this is kind of a definition that I came up with using a number of sources, as you can see cited. And discovery-based learning is an instructional approach in which students independently gain knowledge and skills by extensively exploring the problem-solving space without being directly provided target learning outcome. And I think two factors here, for me, is at least most important, is the independence and exploration of the problem-solving space. And as I was also reading and familiarizing with the literature, I could also easily see that it's related to many other different pedagogical approaches. It either builds on or shares a lot of similarities and overlaps. So one of them is student-centered or self-directed learning, which are, obviously, as you know, approaches which stress the responsibility and initiative of students in the learning process. And the way I look, and the way I understand, discovery-based learning is essentially a student-centered and self-directed learning approach. Another one is active learning, and these are the approaches where we see, and you already mentioned a little bit about this, Richard, where students are considered to be active participants in the learning process. And this, again, active learning is also, I think, a broader term, the way I see it, but discovery-based learning could be considered a part of an active learning approach. Another related construct I see is experiential learning, and this is an approach where experience plays a key role, and those reflection on those experiences is the way how learners actually construct knowledge. And again, I see discovery-based learning as an experiential approach as well, and the way the knowledge is constructed is through this experience of discovery. And finally, inquiry-based learning, which is a pedagogical approach in which learning comes from following inquiry processes. And again, one way to look at discovery-based learning is through an inquiry. So I think these are not identical, but highly related and overlapped concepts. That's the kind of position how I see discovery-based learning within the broader educational literature. Okay, so what I was interested in is to finding a way to connect discovery-based learning with student innovativeness. And as I mentioned, as I was going through these different practices and the literature, there's so many diverse, seemingly disconnected activities that are considered as part of discovery-based learning, and there are really different ways to define discovery-based learning as well when I look at the literature. So I thought, can we find a way, have a framework, some structure into this seemingly messy literature? And again, and the kind of main motivation of the framework is to really be able to connect it with the level of innovativeness that can come from students. So I thought there are two dimensions that could actually help us categorize this broader practices around discovery-based learning. And one of them is, what is the objective? Whether an approach is creativity focused or information focused. So creativity focus, by which I mean whether an development of innovative solution is required as an end outcome of discovery, and information focus, whether it's focused on achieving a certain conceptual understanding of a topic. Another one is openness of an inquiry. So to what extent an inquiry is open versus closed, and I define openness versus closeness whether a kind of a process is open when learners actually can identify their problem, and it's closed when they're given a problem, a well-defined problem from the educator. So in the business school, we really like 2x2 matrices. So I want to put that into a 2x2. So here's my 2x2 matrix to my attempt to kind of make sense of this. So an inquiry could be an open and creativity focus, which I named as proactive creativity. And it could be an open and information focus, which I named as proactive search. And if an inquiry is closed in creativity focus, I call it as responsive creativity. And if it is closed in information focus, I refer to that as responsive search. So an example would be if in an activity we ask students, learners to identify the problem and define the problem themselves and expect as an outcome of that an innovative solution, that will be a proactive creativity approach. If we give students a specific problem and ask them to come up with creative solutions with that, it will be a responsive creativity. If you give the students if you ask students to identify the problem in an open way, so and gain some conceptual understanding around that problem, that will be a proactive search. And when students are presented with a well-defined problem that has been identified by the educator, and they're asked to search information from different sources, that will be responsive search. So how do these relate to processes of innovativeness? So and I try to connect this with what we know from psychology of innovative behavior and creativity, and try to look at how well these are in training learners in different steps of innovation process. All right. So if you compare an information focus and a creativity focus one, in information focus one, you are doing, and so basically you will realize in a moment that I see all of these approaches are a good training ground for innovativeness, but some of them are better if the objective is innovative, right? Obviously, there might be some other objectives and some other factors for which they might not be the ideal, but from innovativeness standpoint, some of them are better than others, but all of them are a way to prepare students to be more innovative. And in information focus one, what effectively we ask from students or learners is to explore information. And we know that from also creativity research that's really related to, it's associated with better creative outcomes. My own research as well shows that the broader individual search across different domains, different topic areas, the more innovative they are. The creativity focus has all those benefits because it also entails some level of information exploration. But on top of that, it also trains or asks and requires students to generate some ideas, solutions. And in the process, when you generate ideas, what typically happens is you don't generate just one idea. You generate a bunch of them, and then you select from that as well. So idea selection is another process that are key in the innovative process that are trained in creativity focus. So I guess the graph here also obvious that creativity focus one is better off than information focus when it comes to improving student innovations. And if you compare the responsive with proactivity, so we got all these benefits that I've mentioned before, but in the proactive approach, we also have this at the very first step of the innovation. All the innovation with identification of a problem, and that's also important when you go to a workplace that's highly complex, and being able to just identify the problem to generate solutions for is important. So in that sense, proactive approaches are better training ground for responsive creativity. And there's a bunch of research, some of which I am citing, that leaks and is done mainly by Mihaly, which I probably not pronounce right, but I did my best. I worked on it actually. I promise, but it's probably not right. Right. So he also links. There's a number of also in the context of education that links the students who are involved in problem construction are better off, more creative in the paintings eventually they generated. So there's some evidence within the context of education as well, and there's some evidence also in the broader psychology. Right. So so I guess so far I made the point that proactive and creative focused approaches are better in driving student innovativeness, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the kind of panacea or the right approach in each and every condition, each and every learning condition. I think we know that students differ, okay? And I think different approaches are more suitable depending on the composition of the student body that we are teaching. And I identified 3 of them, and based on past research that I think is important in guiding our choices of which of these 4 forms of discovery-based learning is more appropriate. And one of that is cognitive skills or metacognitive abilities broadly. And students, what we know from research is that students with lower metacognitive abilities, perhaps unsurprisingly, need more structure. And if we select a really unstructured form of discovery-based learning, that will be a bit too much. That will be beyond manageable for their cognitive needs. Another one is probably important is domain knowledge. So domain knowledge allows, if you have domain knowledge in an area, it will allow you to allocate your greater cognitive resources on this unstructured exploration instead of allocating those resources to kind of familiarize with the domain. So all else being equal, having greater domain knowledge will give you more cognitive resources, more cognitive capacity to tackle this unstructured process. And the third one is prior experience of students. So some students will, in some stages in their career, some students will have some experience in different, maybe discovery-based learning or other approaches where they are trained, they are learned through unstructured processes. So they, to what extent they are familiar with those kind of processes should also matter. So if they have been taught only through traditional methods, then they will be less able or capable to really navigate unstructured processes, this challenging process of these unstructured discovery-based learning. So these 3 factors could help determining the right approach. And as I told you, we like 2x2s. And here's another 2x2. That's how we think about it. And a way to kind of think about this could be, we could consider these 2 of these factors as the dimensions of classifying, clustering, segmenting, or understanding our learners. And if a student body is composed of students, learners that are high in metacognitive skills, as well as high in domain knowledge, we might actually consider proactive creativity that might be ready to really navigate this challenging process. When they're low in both dimensions, probably starting with a responsive search is a more suitable approach that they can actually deal with whereas one is high and the other one is low, proactive search or responsive creativity could be more suitable. Obviously, there are other factors to that, which I'll discuss, but I think this is kind of a good starting point to think about how do we link the student body with the discovery-based learning approach that we want to implement. And as I mentioned, we can also consider one of the other criteria there. Instead of past experience, instead of domain knowledge, we can also consider past experience as one of the dimensions together with metacognitive skills, or the other two, prior experience as well as domain knowledge. So the idea is same here. So if they're high in both of them, maybe they can be ready for proactive creativity. If not, depending on where they are, maybe some more structured approaches, less demanding approaches might be a better starting point. This is my last 2x2, I promise. I really resisted the temptation there. So I also want to talk a little bit about kind of teacher-controlled factors and approaches that could help getting the most of discovery-based learning approaches, and especially helping the students navigate this challenging process that I mentioned before. And one is having some guidance and some assistance in this process is potentially helpful. Some people refer to that as enhanced discovery, as far as I can see. Some people refer to it as assisted discovery. I actually found a meta-analysis on the topic which compared discovery-based learning approaches with alternatives, either traditional one or assisted versus unassisted. And what they found is kind of highlighted the importance of assistance and guidance in this process. So when compared to other forms of teaching approaches, unassisted discovery actually performed worse in terms of learning outcomes. Whereas when they compared enhanced discovery with other forms of instruction methods, actually perform better. And they have not super strong effect size, but a meaningful small effect sizes. Obviously, I think it's worthwhile to note that they didn't look at innovativeness here. As far as I'm aware, any empirical study that linked the two, but they compared the learning outcomes. But I think it kind of makes the point that assistance and guidance and enhancement of this process is important, because discovery-based learning is not an easy undertaking for most of the students. Another one is openness to innovation. And this is not something that I see being discussed a lot in the educational sciences, but this is something that we discuss more in the innovation literature. And the idea is that this, and it's in contrast to the kind of statistics that I shared around innovation being a buzzword and so on and so forth. It's actually, we are biased against innovations. Inherently, as human beings, we have, and there's probably some evolutionary rules to that, which I won't be talking about it. If you take this kind of novel road, maybe a tiger will attack you, etc. So there might be something inherent there, but this is very much fun. Maybe over a coffee, we can talk about that. But we also see in the context of how we evaluate innovative outcomes, we are biased. And these are just two of the research that I will be sharing. For example, the one by Jennifer Miller and colleagues found that through experimental studies, people say they want creativity, but when they're actually shown creative outcomes, they are biased against it. And they explain this is due to their motivation to reduce uncertainty. In a way, uncertainty avoidance. Another one is my research where we looked at an open innovation platform. So my research also on these digital platforms. So in that platform, a company formed that. So it was a company-owned platform for their customers and others, anyone basically, to come up and generate innovative ideas. So you would expect in this kind of a platform, company would really appreciate the ideas, right? Because this is basically the main reason, the precise reason why they formed it. And what we found is, yes, they like innovation, but only to a certain extent. So the relationship is like this inverted U-curve. So they don't like if the idea is not innovative. They also don't like it when it's too innovative. So as I think the takeaway for us as the lecturers is when we want to kind of adopt an approach where we want to encourage creativity, if you are adopting a creativity-focused discovery, we want to be aware of our own biases. And there's some simple things that could be done, which I've also discussed in my research. Basically, just being aware of this bias is really first step. And having specific evaluation criteria with you is also useful. So it works in companies. So when you kind of have an evaluation criteria which emphasizes novelty, that helps already. And some other things that are being done in the kind of organizational context is put together diverse teams, diverse panel members who are evaluating innovative ideas. It's less applicable in our case, but if you are evaluating group projects as a team, etc., that's also worthwhile to think about. Having a panel as diverse members, so they are generally more receptive to innovation. The third one is, because this process is tough, students often experience negative emotions. So it's really important to help them navigate those negative emotions. And there are a bunch of strategies that could be done, and some of them have empirical evidence as well. For example, so this is based on participants who were trainees for a complex simulation program. So 350 participants. What they found is like simple approaches, simple positive statements like, remember, worry won't help anything. The task may be challenging, but I know I can do it. Asking them to do that or telling them, they both seem to help them get more this approach. And this is another example where, this is about active learning, but one of the reasons why people experience negative emotions is this active process as well. And also it helps early on to frame the errors in a positive way also seem to help, and it's good to kind of have, it makes sense, but it's also good to have this empirical evidence in a very relevant context. And finally, encouraging smart failures for creativity-focused projects is important. So the thing is, obviously, no one likes failure, right? I mean, you won't want to go there and say, okay, go and fail. But failure is really part and parcel of the innovation process. You really need to fail. And the key distinctive factor here, obviously, you don't want to go and fail blindly, but what at least companies appreciate is that smart failures, some companies actually reward those smart failures. What does it mean? There are different dimensions, but maybe one important part is, do you have a specific idea, hypothesis you are testing? Is that sensible in the first place? And when you try to go ahead and do that, it doesn't work, then it would be kind of considered as a smart failure as opposed to kind of not having no thinking whatsoever and then going and trying something, right? So I think if you want to adopt an approach which is creativity focused, we want to also find a way to appreciate smart failures. Otherwise, we will really promote risk avoidance among students, and they won't want to go and innovate out of their ranks. As we know, they're very much, even the most intrinsically motivated ones are very much also motivated by marks, right? So if there's not only thing that motivates them. So I think these are some of the things that could be done to make most of these discovery-based learning approaches, especially some of them are particularly applicable when the focus is on creativity. And I want to talk a bit about the biggest elephant in most rooms these days, as you also mentioned. I said AI, generative AI was happening, and I want to kind of try to share some of my thoughts. And obviously, these are a bit less, or not. I mean, these are not really evidence-based. The others are more evidence-based. So these are speculations, and I would love to really have a conversation about them and some of my thoughts. one of the things that's relevant to the domain is I also do a lot of research on the psychology of AI. So some of the ideas comes from that. So psychology of AI in the sense that how consumers actually respond to AI, our products, apps, etc. Right. So one thing we know is generative AI is here. Again, another obvious statement, obvious insight. And I find this, I don't know if you've seen this, that this is by a team of OpenAI researchers and I think UPenn and someone from UPenn as well. So what they tried to find out is to what extent current jobs and current skills are exposed to AI. And I'm not going to go into the details, but I think the answer is a lot of it. Right? This kind of simple interpretation of that is the current jobs and skill sets are really exposed to AI. And two kind of main takeaways are that 80% of the US workforce would have at least 10% of their job is exposed. And 19% of them are actually exposed more than half. And sorry, I'm not kind of sharing all the good news here, but I don't know. I mean, depending on some of you will find it exciting, some of them will find it terrifying. But what we could see also, and this is a comparison of performance of GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 in some of the common tests. So for those who are not familiar, it was kind of new. It was the kind of language model behind ChatGPT, and GPT was the kind of the model, the default model when they introduced the ChatGPT, and then they updated it a couple of months ago to GPT-4, but only if you're using the plus version. So if you're just using the free version, you're using. So there are a bunch of different tests there, and are including bar exam, English language, GMAT, etc., etc. And what is interesting here is I don't think it's what's interesting is the their actual score there, but the improvement they made in such a short span of time. So all the things and this exposure data that I've given actually be changing and increasing the exposure could be really significantly in not so distant future. Again, I approached this in the way that I approached innovativeness. So this is happening. It's going to change the world. Or at least, even if it doesn't change or transform the world completely, it's going to affect and influence, and students are going to be working in a different working environment than it is today. And my views also resonates with yours. I think we need to prepare them for that. And although the response has been quite different, and ranging from really prohibiting the use of anything ChatGPT to encouraging it. I'm more on the kind of encouraging it side. Let's encourage that, but obviously let's be aware of all these limitations and all the issues around that. Because at the end of the day, I think job replacement, our students will be more exposed to job replacement from another woman with AI than AI directly, at least in the maybe next 5 years or 10 years and so on. So I think it's important for them to develop their skills. How much time do I have? I tend to talk a lot. Okay, I'm just gonna go on and wrap up a bit quickly. So this might be the new world. And I want to share some of the skills that are inherent in discovery-based learning and are also increasingly important in the age of generative AI. And one of them is problem formulation. And that kind of speaks to open versus closed distinction. And we look at, if you remember my 2x2, right? So to what extent we ask the students themselves to actually identify or define and design the problem itself. And the reason why I think it's important is because this is, in my opinion, and I actually have a paper now in Harvard Business Review that's being reviewed. I don't know if it will end up there or not, but where I entitled it, Problem Formulation is the New Programming Skills in the Age of Generative AI. And the idea is that it's really the way we communicate with these tools. The better we get at formulating our problems, the better we will get, better output we will get from this generative AI and AI tools. So that's the core idea. I know there's all the buzz around prompt engineering. I'm not very excited about it. I don't think it's the future. And two very simple, three very simple reasons. First, I mean, already these tools are getting very adept at understanding what we want. Second, tools themselves are actually really good at generating prompt. If you give them your problem, if you ask ChatGPT, okay, I want to do this, can you generate a prompt for this? So they're really good at it. And the third one is, it's those prompt engineering and that are really algorithm dependent, and these algorithms change really significantly, and their algorithms are different for different tasks. I don't think that's a really important transferable skill, but as problem formulation, I think is an important transferable skill. And I won't be talking in detail about the components of that, but the four key kind of components of problem formulation that I argued in the HBR paper is that diagnosing a problem, so really identifying the root cause of the problem, decomposing it. Some problems are really big, so to kind of see the connections between the components of the problems and kind of ask AI, for example, about those components. Another one is problem reframing. So looking at the problem from a different way would sometimes open up different solution space. And the final one is perhaps the most challenging one, is the problem constraint design. So try to understand what are the constraints of the problem. That's basically would guide kind of solutions that you'll get. And discover AI as a partner. So exploration of how to find right generative AI tools is really important. So I think it could be made part of some discovery-based learning processes, part of the discovery that's included in the inquiry. And just the number of new tools coming really high. So it's really important to develop these skills that will allow you to identify the right or most appropriate tools. I think like there's been like 10,000, this is not a very kind of reliable source, but like some sources seems to suggest there's more than 1,000 tools that are already come after GPT-4 in the past month or two. And it's also important to kind of experiment, interact with those tools, see where, depending on how you define the problem, what kind of output you are getting. So that learning through experimenting with them is also important. And I think perhaps one of the most important one, and that is not always, this is some view that as part of the discovery-based learning, I do as well, but not always considered the inherent part of discovery-based learning, which is kind of critical thinking and reflection. I mean, regardless of how people think about it, whether it's, I think it's not so important whether agree on whether it's part of discovery-based learning or not. But what's important is that I think the skill is important in general, but it's increasingly important in the age of generative AI because these tools hallucinate or create inaccurate information and biased information as well. So being able to really evaluate and judge that and is also very important to see when you discover something through AI, you want to be able to really critically evaluate that. And also in terms of reflection, these tools are also, they are, for some of us at least, they will kind of bring a challenge to our identity, especially if you're using them in the areas that are connected to our self-worth. Maybe for most of us, it is about, it's about writing. So if we are identified with that, it's an important part of our self-worth, we will feel those kind of emotional reactions to that. So reflecting on that and understanding that is also an important part of working with them. Okay, so very quickly, this is a framework that I developed, which I'll be using very soon. And this is kind of a framework that I think could help to develop some of the skills that I mentioned, and is also, I think, could be considered as a discovery-based learning approach, which is problem, AI, interaction and reflection. The reason why I chose these steps is because it allowed me to say pair. But I think those steps are important. The names could have changed, but so basically it starts with formulating the problem, identification of the right AI tools, interacting with it, like developing those experimentation skills, and at the end, and this interaction also entails critically evaluating the content. So in the interaction, whether or not you want to incorporate that in your solution, and finally reflection on this experience, for the reasons that I mentioned. This is, I'm not going to go into depth about that, but this is how I will be using in my coursework guidance. And I'll be asking students to do that for a marketing strategy module. I'll ask them to identify, I will ask them to generate a marketing campaign, and they will be choosing the product and service that they want to identify that for, use the relevant AI tools, interact with them, and then come up with a reflective report at the end on top of the campaign document that they'll come. That's it. Am I good on time? How long did it take?
Like the plan.
Right. For once. Do you have any challenging questions for me?
Not massively challenging. I don't think so.
As we agreed, right? You only asked me this simple.
Just feel to the now. Yeah, as I said, so if you have other questions that arise, feel free to ask in the traditional way. There's a few questions on Mentimeter as well that I'll perhaps start off with. Just get some discussion going. One question that occurred to me as well that's on here is how do we spoke about students having lower or higher abilities in various domains. So the question here is how to identify students with lower ability to then apply that or to support them in your framework that you give us.
Right. So how do we identify their abilities, their experience, and expertise?
Yeah.
I guess some of them are relatively more obvious, right? If you're teaching the last module in a master's program, and if that module is really built on some other modules prior to that, it's safe to assume that there's some level of domain knowledge there. I think another one is kind of what grade they are, what level they are. If they're higher, and in that meta-analysis, actually, they also found age as a moderator. So the older they are, and we're still looking at a kind of young group of students, right? But the older they are, the better, the more they benefit from discovery-based approaches. So I guess their level is also an indicator. It's probably correlated to their cognitive abilities as well, because of all the things they will go throughout that development. So I think those are some indicators. I think if you want to go really customized and hands-on, I think it's usually helpful what we do in marketing. Right? So we try to understand our consumers. We ask them a bunch of questions and try to understand where they are on that area. So starting with a survey, for example, to the module in advance to understand where they are is probably important. I know it's not always very practical when you think about how slow these things in UK academia, like you need to get an approval to change your assignment for a year. But I guess if you're teaching the same module, then things are probably, you can assume that there will be a similar body of students. But I think, and you can change the bits that you can through this kind of survey approach to understand where they are.
Just a follow-up question that I've kind of had while you were talking. If you're applying different approaches to different students, how do you personalize your approach to discovery-based learning with everyone here in the room?
Well, I think some of the elements are easier to customize on the go, such as the feedback that you get. So that's what I do. For example, in one of my modules, I was doing proactive creativity, which was actually a module on creativity itself. It was a module called Creativity Design Innovation. So it was suitable to have a creativity focus. In fact, what I did is students were coming from I think, over 30 countries, and they were exposed to different kind of educational training. And for some of them, this was really tough. They really wanted kind of more clear guidance in terms of what is expected, when is expected, how it should look, but it's really against the purpose of what I wanted to do there. And what I tried to do there was kind of having this bespoke meetings. So having meetings with the groups and then try to understand where they're struggling and all these things around emotional regulation, to kind of explain them, okay, this is the process. It's normal that you're struggling. It's normal that you're experiencing negative emotions, but in a way, like, trust the process, it will come. And all the things that you're experiencing now is actually what you should. So I think those are the components that you could customize. I guess some of them are things that's basically that you need to kind of apply in for all students, like open text space, that is applicable across all the submissions that from all the students. But I think those are, I think the key for me at least is this feedback component that you could adjust and try to help solve specific problems and specific negative emotions that they're experiencing. I guess one thing to be careful, and sometimes I might also kind of fail to that mistake, is to not giving them away answers, right? Because that's kind of part of the discovery. And if you see that somebody is really suffering, you might be inclined and tempted to help them out. But I think you need to go through that process if the eventual objective is to become more innovative for their next steps. Does this answer the question?
I think so. Let's have one more follow-up, just to not to hog, and then I'll hand over to others. So it's going to come through here as well. So if you're having students working in groups, which is there's lots of discussions around group work, group assessments, and so on. How do you then form those groups and have students learn in those groups, have them assess in those groups with these different abilities in a discovery-based approach?
Well, I think that's a brilliant question. And that's something that I also think a lot about. And I guess maybe I was thinking of whether or not to incorporate in this presentation itself, whether comparing team-based discoveries with individual discoveries as well, like in this innovation framework. And I tried to keep it focused and kind of be able to use my 2x2, so I didn't eventually, but the idea was, I think, because if you look at, again, if it is about preparing students for their next steps in terms of innovativeness, what we observe is a lot of innovative problem solving happens in teams. So for that reason, I think it's important to be able to kind of operate and navigate this process as a team. So I think this doesn't answer your question. This just introduces kind of my answer to that. So I think team-based, discovery-based learning approaches are more conducive to increasing student innovativeness or preparing students for the innovative demands in the workplace. And how do we form those teams? I went for, when I formed them, and I was the course director of the marketing program at Space Business School before King's College London. And in that, I had this idea to form the teams at the beginning of the first term and for all the modules, instead of kind of all modules kind of forming their own teams and having different approaches. And the idea was to really force them to operate in diverse teams, because generally students are allowed to form their own teams, and it's a good idea, and which I do that in the second term as well. But in the first term, it tends to be kind of groups of people from the same country, so I wanted to avoid that. And so diversity is one of the factors, and I couldn't go, in-depth diversity in terms of cognitive diversity, personality diversity. I could not go there. I didn't have that data, but I could go on some kind of more surface level diversity, like in terms of where they are from and their gender. So I tried to kind of form those teams. And I think it's a good idea to form those diverse teams, not only because diversity is related to better innovative outcomes in general, in meta-analysis as well. There are moderators. It's a long discussion. I do have some research on that as well, but I'm not going to go into that. But generally, there is a positive correlation. between them. And secondly, I think it's also important to be able to operate in a team where you are exposed to different ideas and try to kind of reconcile those ideas. I think it's a better training of idea selection as well. So in that sense, I think that's a good idea too. In an ideal world, I think maybe you could, which I didn't do, I think you could consider thinking about this metacognitive abilities, domain expertise, and prior experience as part of that as well, to mix them up, to kind of complement them so that they can actually navigate more complex discovery-based approaches, which I didn't do, which is tough to do, which is also sometimes not feasible to do in the sense that they might be pretty similar to each other at the time they come to you. But I think that's probably be helpful. So there's some level of peer-to-peer learning and support that's happening on the areas that team members need. So that's this. Does this answer your question?
It's a big question. So it's hard to provide an exact answer in 2 minutes. But yeah, I think it's similar to when, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago we were starting to talk about active learning as the main term. Similar kind of problems and challenges that we're discussing then, having similar things now. I wonder if we could move a bit to talk about from the staff perspective. So that's a bit about the students kind of working groups and so on. There's a few questions here around staff and what do we do and how do we actually grapple with this? How to actually set up our teachers so that students can learn in the way that you've been describing. I'm going to kind of summarize a few points people have made. There's things around assessments we mentioned before. So the idea that creativity, being innovative, embarking on discovery requires risk-taking and from the students, but also from the staff. So how do we kind of create that culture, I guess, among us in the room and other colleagues to embrace these kind of approaches?
I think you're very right. Indeed, this is it is not the easiest, especially if you take proactive and creative approach. It's a harder job as an educator. That might already mean to not use it already. But I guess some of the things that could help is to try to be more open. And I think how do we do that? Like, I think if you want to do that, we want to actually genuinely want innovative outcomes. And again, like with some of the research that I've shown, and including my own, that we might be more, we might not actually want innovation, but actually implement that, and we might actually punish innovative. So that's one important component. But I guess I think there is no getting around of it needs more work. I couldn't find myself a solution to make it, as easy as other approaches that are not built on creativity. It obviously gets easier in the sense that I think when you first start, whenever I come up with a first assignment, it is tougher because by its very nature you will see different kind of failures and different kind of ideas and solutions. But after a while, you kind of have a better idea of like 90% of the issues that you will be experiencing. So you kind of have answers to them as well. You also kind of understand it better as the time moves on, at what stages they need more support. And the first year is a bit learning for you as well, to try to kind of keep the communication channels open to understand whether they are struggling or not. I usually ask them every week, especially when it's the first time, how's it going with this assignment? Do you have any questions? Are you struggling in anything? So it's also be market research, data collection effort for you to be able to kind of make it easier for you. And from an assessment and feedback standpoint, I think the most difficult bit is kind of appreciating smart failures, because it's easier to mark things as right or wrong, to distinguish genuine stupid failures from smart ones is much harder job and it's greater engagement. But yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a I don't have a secret kind of solution, and that would make things much easier. But I think it's worthwhile. In my experience, it's worthwhile, and it's kind of yeah, it's just getting some feedback from students that they think it helps in what they are doing. I think that's worth.
And sticking with the kind of big questions that maybe we're all going to hopefully kind of contribute to answering or getting towards some kind of answer. So not necessarily for you to answer right now, but how do we assess all these things? How do we assess creativity? How do we assess the ability to go on a discovery-based, and again, journey? Sorry, kind of ideation. All these things. How do we assess these things fairly consistently, and so on? It's
right.
Question.
I think we could learn a bit from psychology research as well as organizational practices, and what we could learn from psychology research is that they have established tools for assessing creativity and at least certain criteria that will certainly need some modification. But we also see that in organizations as well, what we know is that the organizations that have evaluation criteria, specific evaluation criteria, are usually better off when it comes to innovation. So I think that's a starting point. So what are the criteria we really want to think about it? And I think it should have at least two components, which could be modified to the context that an educator is operating. One is novelty, how novel it is in comparison to existing ideas, practices, solutions. Another one is usefulness. So it's novel but completely far-fetched for the context that it needs to contribute to. So it has to have those two components. And what I try to do in my assignments to be able to understand also the smart failures is ask them to report on the process. So basically, okay, how many ideas have you generated, for example? So tell me the discarded ideas as well. Tell me why you were able to do it as well. So that you say, I think that should be a part of, not should be, because and different things that people look at. But I find it in my experience, I find it helpful again see whether someone actually put the effort to be innovative there, and did it make sense in what they are doing? Did they use the right tools to promote creativity, and did I kind of select them? So these are actually, this whole process actually consists of stages that are relevant for individual processes of creativity. So when they report on that, you could also see how engaged they were in those kind of steps. So that I find it very, very helpful as well. Obviously, I think one other component, novelty, usefulness, reflecting on the process, and the other one is, I think it relates to we could. And I think we could do it more and more now with the advance of this generative AI tools, is the implementation. So before now, they can generate an image very easily. They can generate a code very easily. I mean, this, and it's gonna get better. So we could actually ask them to put together a kind of working prototype of an application. And so I think it's also fair and perhaps necessary to reconsider what we are expecting from that in the age of all these advanced tools that is at their disposal again. So that will also push them to really think about, okay, what can I use? I need to generate an image. I need to find a platform. Is it Midjourney? Is it DALL-E? So they can actually explore that and that image and so on. So I think this implementation bit is now we can actually kind of measure better, or at least ask them to do more, and then we can also train them on that. I'm curious to hear if there are any other kind of approaches to do that as well. So this is what I came up with to control creativity, but it's also not an easy undertaking. So we sometimes see that, usually we see that very often in reviewer feedback, right? So they could be the same creative output could be evaluated very differently, even when you have the exact same criteria. One reviewer hating, the other one is raving about it, right? I need to address very soon by the end of this week. Think about it. But yeah.
I guess that focus on kind of process rather than product in a way is.
I think process and product. I think they're both that should be there, and I think they should. That's particularly important when.
So there's loads of stuff, loads of questions, comments, and things on here. So I'll do a few summaries. But yeah, if you want to voice your questions, and you haven't got to just listen to my voice, I'll just put one more while if you're thinking of things. There's quite a few questions and comments around the kind of learning outcomes model of curriculum design that most of us, I think, adhere to in universities in this country at least. And my summary of the questions and comments here is basically what are kind of the tensions of ILO's learning outcomes as a framework for designing a curriculum, tensions between that and what you've been discussing today. So discovery-based learning, does that really fit with this learning outcomes model of design?
I think it could be fit, but of course it requires a bit more thinking, especially when the focus is creativity focused. But I mean, please tell me, as I mentioned, I'm not an expert on discovery-based learning, but I'll reflect on some of my practices. And when it is primary, if it is about kind of an information focus, I think it could easily fit into the learning outcomes. That's usually what we want them to do. When it comes to creativity, I think it might consider thinking another outcome, another bullet point there that is also not only learning or constructing knowledge, acquiring conceptual understanding and decision, but also being creative as part of it. And I think that could be incorporated there. And I think you could also, even if you have a creativity focused one, I think you can assess the extent to which conceptual understanding is happening. So from my experience, for example, in this design module, so I was actually looking as well to what extent they understood the tools that we have covered in the module, what extent they have used. And I think these are fairly straightforwardly included in learning outcome, because that's usually a part of learning outcomes for all kinds of different modules. And so that is easy. So this creativity process could also entail information acquisition and understanding, and that could be measured. But I think we probably need also something that's focused on creativity if one wants to use that in the module. And I would argue, and I'm obviously very biased, that this is an important skill set that needs to be acquired in probably most domains, not all of them. Sometimes it could be in an early stage, it could be just about acquiring certain knowledge. But as they move forward, that could be considered across many different disciplines and domains. At least that's from my naive understanding of different domains. That's what I would do. I'm happy to be challenged if I'm not making sense.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. We have about 2 minutes. Let's get my word.
A little further on that point. Okay, so what do you think about this idea that we become more transactional in higher education, that we define learning outcomes, we set up our teaching based on delivery of that, and students buy into that, wanting to achieve a certain outcome? Do you sense, and business school may be different from other universities, but do you sense that could restrict creativity, learning, risk-taking, particularly by students, in a way that perhaps we would have been more comfortable to learn by failing a couple of decades ago? Thank you.
Right. So yeah, great question. So if I understood it right, so having these specific objectives is the constraining factor for creativity and what to do about it. I think it could be, but also I think even within specific target outcomes, if you will, I think one could operate creatively. And it's actually interesting. There's some interesting research on, and part of that is mine. That's why I find it interesting. That links constraints with creative outcomes. And what they found is actually some level of constraints are good for creativity to flourish. So it kind of forces you to, so there are a bunch of different mechanisms, but it challenges you cognitively. It kind of helps you overcome complacency when you don't have any constraint. And sometimes it actually kind of give some guidance to your solution space, so it doesn't become so unmanageable. But I guess what I'm trying to say, I think your broader comment is really right. Because they're a lecturer, if there's all these things, doesn't allow you to incorporate this. Obviously, this is not good for creativity for an educator. But I think the need to achieve certain outcomes does not always necessarily limit what could be done within the class with those students, and whether that what is done is conducive for creativity or not, and in light of all these kinds of extensive research. Does this answer your question? A bit, not really. Maybe we can follow up on.
Okay. I'm Phil Ramsden from the Maths Department. Let's imagine I'm a student, and let's imagine it's a couple of years down the line. AI tools are better than they are now. And let's imagine I'm working with a lecturer who's committed to the framework, and I now have to write a reflective piece on the use of AI tools. And I'm outside my comfort zone. I'm not finding it easy. And I start to think, what can I do? My lecturer talks a good game about smart failure, but I think that they are now going to want me to succeed at this. So I think maybe I could get an AI tool to help me write my reflective. My question is, what do we do if it's AI tools all the way down? And how do we see through to the authentic voice of the learner in those circumstances?
I think that's $1 million question, which I don't really have an answer. I have some thoughts, which I will share, and that's basically, I think nobody knows. So as far as I am aware, there is no tool that could accurately predict whether something is coming from AI or not. So short answer is you don't. And I guess kind of a counter question would be, if you don't use a pair framework, the same problem still applies, right? So whatever assignment you are doing, so that's certainly there. And I think there are some modules, some occasions, some levels where we must consider prohibiting it in when evaluating the students, because I guess it also speaks to critical reflection that they need to have some level of domain understanding to be able to actually interpret and evaluate the output. Right? So if you have no knowledge of maths whatsoever, you're probably not going to be able to judge whether it's doing a good job or not. Or if you have no understanding of marketing, you won't be able to understand whether their marketing recommendations is sensible or not. So I guess there's some levels where we want to develop this domain knowledge. And other than that, I guess we will, I'm approaching this a bit pragmatically. We can't know it anyways, whether they're using AI or not. Sometimes you can know sometimes, but those are the kind of laziest and the worst users of it. So I could say that some of the assignments that I got this year, this is so ChatGPT. But the good ones, there's really no way.
ChatGPT style, isn't there?
Right, exactly. So if there's no substantive content diversity and they're repeating it a lot to fill in the word count, that's just okay. That's ChatGPT. But those, and I also experiment with that. Right? So if you write something and paraphrase it, or if you incorporate the kind of core idea and get it from ChatGPT, it gets much harder for those existing tools to diagnose whether it's coming from there. But I think in principle, aside from those skills that we want them to develop to be able to kind of work with AI tools, I think it's not necessarily a problem if they are able to generate an output and they take the accountability of that and if it's a good outcome. I think that shows some level of preparation for what work to come, and that requires certain understanding as well. I know you disagree.
Well, I think understanding is exactly, it's what I've got written down here. Understanding, 3 times underlined.
Right.
I mean, in maths, we get people to calculate and to prove. One of the reasons we do that is because it feeds into justification of our claims, but it also feeds into understanding why our claims are true. If all that's happening is that students are reflecting after a process of having got AI to do the heavy lifting, I'm not sure at what point that understanding begins to grow.
I think that's a very good point. I'm in agreement with this on this understanding bit. Right? I guess could they learn more and increase their understanding interacting with AI tools? I think in some domains, yes. Could they fine-tune their understanding with AI tools? I think in some domains, yes. So we could actually, there's so many interesting prompts and examples where you actually kind of prompt AI to ask questions on a domain, and then you answer it, it asks you a new question. Even if it doesn't make sense, it could still be used to kind of enhance your understanding. And I think what's very important is, I think it's a very important high-level skill to be able to kind of separate these sensible outputs from insensible ones. And it comes really obviously if you are a domain expert as a lecturer, when the student assignment comes, those who are unable to do that is also sometimes obvious. Right? So I think that also is an important develop as we move forward. But I am in general, it looks like I'm in general a bit more kind of pro AI. Let's develop that skill because this is going to be the norm. But I think you can't develop those skills without having the understanding. So we are certainly 100% on the same page on this.
Thanks, Stephanie. Just because of time beating us, those discussions and questions will go on for the whole week and certainly tomorrow. And tomorrow's keynote panel will be pretty much those kind of questions and discussion.